The age difference of group pets in military marriage research years after a sudden death, Shen Sangyu dressed up as a newlywed daughter.In.Law, and all personnel in the military district courtyard avoided her like snakes and scorpions. Shen Sangyu is a top-notch fighter, a scumbag, and at the same time, he has started his old business of scientific research. At this time, China's technology was backward, and various technologies were severely hindered by other countries. At this time, Huaguo Technology has not yet developed, and research funding is seriously insufficient. There's no other choice but to work hard to earn money and engage in scientific research. Later, a new type of fighter jet soared into the sky, the Jiaolong submarine became a national treasure, and the 9 chapters giant computer shone around the world. At this moment, Huaguo's scientific research and technology are at the pinnacle of the world. Chapter 1. Crossing 1978. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. In 1978, the family courtyard of the 49th City Military Region. In the cold winter of the 12th lunar month, several women wearing navy blue cotton jackets stretched their necks and looked towards the staircase on the 3rd floor. Upstairs, I heard that the captain's newly married daughter.In.Law hasn't moved much today. There shouldn't be anything wrong, right? What can I do? The doctor said it's just a hole in her head. She just needs to take care of it for a few days. Can you still want her to come down and make trouble? Let's just forget it. It's just that when Tuan has grown up with a bright future and married a woman like Shen Sangyu. A few days ago, she suffered a head injury. When Tuan comes back, this little daughter.In.Law may be causing a lot of trouble. At this moment, Shen Sangyu, the object of discussion among these women, stood expressionless in the corridor, worrying about the honeycomb coal that could not be ignited. Shen Sangyu could never have imagined that last night, after developing a new type of aerospace fighter, she suddenly experienced a sharp pain in her chest and died suddenly at work. When she opened her eyes again, she became Shen Sangyu, the new daughter.In.Law of this masterpiece. Shen Sangyu spent a day sorting out the memories of the original owner. The mother of the original owner Shen Sangyu passed away early, and his father passed away from cancer 3 months ago. Before his death, he entrusted his daughter to his subordinate Qingchuan. However, the original owner did not like Qingchuan. Qingchuan was 8 years older than her and came from a rural area in the mountainous area. The family had 3 siblings, and they all relied on him for financial support. Even the dowry money given by this man was pieced together. The original owner was already arrogant and domineering, looking down on the other party. The most important thing was that the original owner had a white moonlight in his heart. Before getting married, he even thought about eloping with the white moonlight. However, why was the elopement not successful in the end? Shen Sangyu searched the original owner's memory, as if it was cut off, unable to remember anything. As for how the original owner died, Shen Sangyu touched a big hole on his forehead and let out a deep sigh. The original owner was very capable of dying because he had a high-ranking and influential father. 3 days ago, the original owner had a sudden argument with Zhou Xinghua from the cultural and artistic troupe. When he was excited, he reached out and pushed Zhou Xinghua, but instead of falling, he fell downstairs and had a big hole in his head. Last night, his wound became inflamed and he passed out with a high fever. When he woke up again, he became Shen Sangyu, a genius military research scientist of the 21st century. However, Shen Sangyu felt that he was also about to die. I'm starving to death. After wearing it over, she lay in bed for a whole day, feeling dizzy from hunger, but the room was cold and deserted. Even in the evening, when Qingchuan still didn't come back. Shen Sangyu got up from bed with a heavy head and light feet, rummaged through the cabinet for a long time, but only a bowl of rice came out. But even so, Shen Sangyu still smashed his mouth, as if he had already smelled the fragrance of rice, and saliva unconsciously flowed out of his mouth. She's too hungry. In my memory, the protagonist was pampered and spoiled. Before her father passed away, she waited every day for her biological father to come back and do it for her. Either she took the money and went to the restaurant, not to mention doing household chores. She never even went into the kitchen. At the age of 13, she was admitted to university and graduated at the age of 15. After graduation, she was tasked with entering a special base to continue her research. Her food, clothing, housing, and transportation were arranged by the state, and her life experience was even less than that of her original owner. She fought against the honeycomb coal stove for a long time, and finally, half an hour later, a white smoke finally rose from the stove. However, before she could wait for her to be happy, the newly born spark was getting weaker and was about to go out. Suddenly, Shen Sangyu's gaze saw many branches on the corridor, so he picked them up and put them all in the stove. Not long after, the honeycomb coal didn't ignite, but there seemed to be more white smoke. Shen Sangyu's smoked black face flashed with a hint of confusion, and he blinked his eyes, feeling lost. On the other side, when Qingchuan and Shen Su finally rushed back, covered in dust and dust. Upon hearing the wind blowing at Qingchuan's feet, Shen Su couldn't keep up and couldn't help but complain, "You're worried about your sister.In.Law. Don't worry, didn't you ask Mrs. Lin to take care of her before you left? She'll definitely be fine. Whose house is on fire?" Suddenly, a scream came from the nearby family building, and when Qingchuan and Shen Shuqi looked up together. "Team leader, that seems to be your home." Before he could finish speaking, when Qingchuan had already walked up the stairs with lightning speed. The family courtyard he was assigned to was located in the first room at the corner of the third floor. At this moment, thick smoke emanated from the position on the third floor, and all the family members went downstairs. When Qingchuan didn't see Shen Sangyu's figure, and his heart tightened as his steps became faster and faster. However, as he ran home anxiously, he saw a weak and helpless figure squatting by the stove, frantically handing in the dry branches that had been wet a few days ago. When Qingchuan's forehead veins were exposed, and he calmly asked, "Shen Sangyu, what are you doing?" Shen Sangyu instinctively turned around when he heard the sound. Under the white smoke, the man was tall and straight, dressed in a green standing military uniform. His eyebrows and eyes were wide, and the corners of his mouth were tightly pursed in a straight line, seeming somewhat unhappy. "This is her current husband, Wen Qingchuan." Shen Sangyu ignored the expression on Qingchuan's face, his dark little face suddenly burst into a smile, and his deer-like eyes were ecstatic. Shen Sangyu rubbed himself up, but due to severe hypoglycemia, he suddenly felt dizzy and dizzy. As his face was about to fall to the ground, when Qingchuan quickly hugged him. When Qingchuan, you have come back. If you don't come back, I'm afraid I'll starve to death. Sudden death at work is not difficult for Shen Sangyu. She has also been well received in the era when food, clothing, housing, and transportation required tickets and letters of introduction. But why is it all time traveling? Only she will starve to death in less than 24 hours after traveling. Shen Sangyu felt more and more aggrieved as she thought, tears streaming down her face. "I want to cook porridge, but the stove only smokes but doesn't catch fire. What's the matter?" When Qingchuan lowered his gaze and looked at the damp firewood still smoking. Without explaining, he said, "Your head injury hasn't healed yet. Let's go rest first and I'll cook." Shen Sangyu nodded like a chick pecking at rice, quickly returned to bed and lay down. In no time, he smelled waves of rice fragrance. "It's time for dinner." Shen Sangyu fell asleep on the bed, half asleep. Hearing the voice, she heard that Qingchuan had already brought a bowl of millet porridge and pickles from unknown places into the room. Upon hearing the sound, Shen Sangyu instantly opened his eyes and rushed to the dining table at the fastest speed in his life. When Qingchuan also sat down, but he was a bit far away from Shen Sangyu. Shen Sangyu took a mouthful of congee and immediately warmed up in her stomach. She touched her stomach. Shen Sangyu felt alive at once and was about to thank Wen Qingchuan. She found that Wen was far away from her. At this moment, Shen Sangyu's mind suddenly surged out. The original owner, because he looked down on Qingchuan, not only disliked him for training every day and smelling of sweat, but also forbade him from eating with him. Shen Sangyu, who was going to ask Qingchuan what he was doing sitting so far away, immediately stopped talking and could only bow her head and sip the rice porridge in her mouth. There is not much rice at home. The congee is not thick. Shen Sangyu doesn't know whether it is Qingchuan's skill or she has been hungry for too long. She always thinks this is the most delicious bowl of congee she has eaten. Qingchuan has been watching Shen Sangyu silently. Finally, when Shen Sangyu's bowl of congee bottomed out, Qingchuan suddenly asked, "Sorry, there was an urgent task last night. I left before I could say hello to you." "Ah. It's okay," Shen Sangyu instinctively replied. However, as soon as Shen Sangyu thought of the original owner's elaborate character design, he instinctively glanced at Qingchuan. Sure enough, Qingchuan's expression in his eyes was much heavier than usual. Shen Sangyu's heart skipped a beat. With a sudden inspiration, he slammed the bowl in his hand onto the table and said, "What are you looking at? It's none of my business if you have an urgent task. Do you want me to care about my husband like a military sister.In.Law in the family courtyard? Don't even think about it." The next second, Qingchuan withdrew his gaze. Just as Shen Sangyu was beating drums in his heart, Qingchuan suddenly said, "I apologize last night, but I met Mrs. Lin on the way and gave her 20 yuan to help take care of you. She didn't come." Although it is a question sentence, Qingchuan's tone is quite affirmative. Shen Sangyu recalled the memories of the original owner. From yesterday until now, no one came to visit except for herself. Before, when she walked over, she complained that Qingchuan was ignoring her. Now it seems that she was on a last-minute mission and didn't have time to talk to her, but she asked someone to take care of her temporarily. But what about people now? Shen Sangyu was about to speak when a rapid knocking came from the door. Chapter 2. High Fever. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. "Mrs. Lin, why did you come?" Qingchuan stood up and opened the door. Standing at the door was a chubby woman in a gray coat, about 40 years old. She was now standing at the door, looking inside. This person is exactly the object of their previous discussion, Shen Shui, the wife of Instructor Lin. Qingchuan's face was not very good, and now seeing Shen Shui coming over felt like a mirror in his heart. He received a task during training yesterday and didn't have time to go home to tell Shen Sangyu. On the way, he happened to meet Shen Shui, who was picking up his child from school. So he gave him 20 yuan in hopes that the other party could help take care of Shen Sangyu. Just now, Shen Sangyu firmly told him that no one came to his door. He married Shen Sangyu for 3 months. Although Shen Sangyu has a bad temper, he never tells lies. Therefore, Qingchuan can be certain that Shen Shui not only did not deliver food to Shen Sangyu all day, but also did not even go upstairs to take a look. Shen Sangyu is seriously ill and has not yet recovered. When he went to training yesterday, he was still suffering from a low fever. Thinking about how Shen Sangyu saw his expression just now, he couldn't imagine how Shen Sangyu would have spent tonight if he hadn't come back today. Even if there is no emotional connection between him and Shen Sangyu, since he married her, he will have to take care of her for a lifetime. Therefore, at this moment, Qingchuan's face doesn't look very good. Shen Shui looked at Qingchuan's black face and felt a little guilty. She quickly explained, "Let me take a look at Sister Shen. Is she feeling better now? Thanks to Aunt Torin, she hasn't starved to death yet." Suddenly, a soft and sticky sound came from the living room. As soon as the voice fell, Shen Sangyu came out with a pale face and white gauze on top of her head. Shen Sangyu and the original owner were both from the south, speaking with a hint of soft talk, but Shen Sangyu's expression was cold and lazy at the moment, with a hint of mockery in his tone. Shen Shui felt even more guilty and lowered her head, afraid to look at Shen Sangyu's gaze. "Miss Shen, what were you saying? It was my aunt who had something to delay at noon. Isn't it now that she's coming to see you? Shen Shui spoke, even convinced by her own words, completely forgetting that she hurriedly went upstairs to take a look because she saw Wen Qingchuan suddenly return. Really, what about the food that was sent to me? Ha! What kind of food? What kind of food? Shen Shui was confused and looked at the other person with wide eyes. Shen Sangyu smiled angrily and said, Wen Qingchuan gave you 20 yuan yesterday to take care of me. Is it possible that you still want to embezzle it? Shen Sangyu's voice was not loud, but she was already the center of attention in the entire family courtyard. As soon as she shouted, many people watched the scene. People in this era love face, but Shen Shui didn't expect Shen Sangyu to directly say that to her. Her face turned red with anger for a moment and she said, who's going to embezzle your money? And I've already told you it was because I had something to delay at noon. Didn't I just come back home to see you? Shen Sangyu only wanted to chuckle a few times in his heart. In the original owner's memory, this Lin sister.In.Law had a big mouth and was careless. The original owner had the current battle record and this Lin sister.In.Law was indispensable. Do you still want to embezzle 20 yuan this time? Don't even think about it. Shen Sangyu endured a headache and was about to speak when Wen Qingchuan suddenly spoke up, Sister Lin, since you haven't taken care of my wife, you naturally want to return the money. Finally, Wen Qingchuan added, 20 yuan, not a penny less. Nowadays, an ordinary worker's monthly salary is only 30.40 yuan, but surprisingly, Wen Qingchuan gave him 20 yuan all at once. I originally thought that Shen Sangyu's aggressive eating of melons couldn't help but feel toothache, and I thought to myself, why didn't Wen Qingchuan find him? Lin sister.In.Law, being a person is not like this. 20 yuan is our salary for most of the month, so you have to pay back Captain Wen. Shen Shui's face turned green and white, and she felt a great pain in her heart. It was obvious that she wanted to work hard and not give. At this moment, someone shouted, Coach Lin is here, and before everyone could react, Shen Shui was slapped in the face the next second. This slap caught Shen Shui off guard, and Shen Sangyu was also startled. She stared blankly at Shen Shui, who had covered her face in shock, as well as the suddenly appearing tall and thin man. When Qingchuan saw that Shen Sangyu was clearly scared and quickly pulled her behind him. With a calm face, he took a step forward and said, Coach Lin, what are you doing? We don't have any rules that allow you to hit your wife. Lin Xingfeng felt a bit embarrassed, but even after the fight, he couldn't lower his face and said to Shen Shui with a gloomy expression, hurry up and return the money. Are we short of these 20 yuan at home? You don't think it's embarrassing either. Shen Shui dared not listen at this moment and eagerly took out 2 10-yuan bills from her purse and handed them to Shen Sangyu. Lin Xingfeng's face was still not good, and he felt the lively faces in the yard. With a dark face, he dragged Shen Shui back home with a stumble. Shen Sangyu held the money for a moment without realizing it, and when Qingchuan had already asked people to leave and close the door. It's getting close to dusk now, and as soon as the door closes, the whole house becomes much darker. When Qingchuan turned on the lights, and the orange-yellow electric lights illuminated the entire room. When Qingchuan looked at Shen Sangyu and suddenly felt like he hadn't seen her for a day. Shen Sangyu seemed different from before. Shen Sangyu felt Wen Qingchuan's gaze, and as soon as he looked up, he saw the other person's inquisitive gaze. His heart suddenly thumped, and without hesitation, he tightly grasped the 20 yuan in his pocket. This is mine. Shen Sangyu was not sure how much money the original owner still had, but in his memory, before the original owner was injured, he ate a lot of meat and fish every day. At first, when Qingchuan gave all his salary to the original owner, but who knew that the original owner would go out to eat every day and his salary would be exhausted in just a few days. As a result, when Qingchuan no longer dared to give his salary to the original owner. As a result, the original owner even had a big argument with him, but the other party remained unmoved. Now that when Qingchuan is looking at himself, is it difficult to still want the money back? Shen Sangyu was a bit conflicted. After all, this money is indeed from Wen Qingchuan. But looking around, apart from a few tattered benches and a bed in the master bedroom, the family can almost be described as having nothing to do. If Wen Qingchuan has another mission and he doesn't know how to cook, is he still far from starving to death? Shen Sangyu thought it was absolutely impossible, so he crossed his waist and once again learned from the previous owner and Wen Qingchuan's clamor, "If the money is in my pocket, it's mine. Don't expect me to give it back to you. Also, if you go out in the future, you must leave money for me. Otherwise, like today, even if I'm starving and a ghost, I won't let you go." Upon seeing this, Wen Qingchuan did not ask for money, but said, "If you still have a low fever tomorrow, I will take you to the hospital to see." Wen Qingchuan felt that Shen Sangyu was still the same as before, but his way of speaking was vastly different from before. Although they were all waving their teeth and claws, Shen Sangyu now inexplicably pleased him. Is it difficult to fall and fool oneself? Wen Qingchuan felt a little worried in his heart, thinking that he would go to the hospital tomorrow no matter what, to see where his brain was going wrong. However, before the next day, Shen Sangyu suddenly developed a high fever that evening. The couple has always slept in separate rooms, and Wen Qingchuan slept on a marching bed in the study. As a soldier, his ears are much more alert than ordinary people, and coupled with Shen Sangyu's mild fever today, he has always been paying attention to the movements coming from the master bedroom. Sure enough, by midnight, he heard a painful moan coming from the next door, followed by a thud, as if something had fallen heavily to the ground. Wen Qingchuan had a slight premonition in his heart and indeed found Shen Sangyu fainting under the bed. Shen Sangyu murmured some words he didn't understand, his face pale, but there were also beads of sweat pouring out. Without hesitation, Wen Qingchuan picked up Shen Sangyu and ran to the hospital. Wen Qingchuan didn't have time to borrow a car. It was cold outside, so he could only wrap Shen Sangyu up with a blanket. It wasn't until he ran to the hospital that he realized he was sweating profusely from behind. After the doctor's examination, he suddenly looked at Wen Qingchuan with a scrutinizing gaze. Wen Qingchuan nervously asked, "Doctor, how are you? What is your relationship with this comrade?" Wen Qingchuan quickly said, "I am her husband." The next second, the doctor's face suddenly collapsed and he said, "Why did you just send the patient to the hospital now? The patient has a high fever of 40 degrees. If the fever continues, he will almost become a fool." Chapter 3. Falling into the water and saving people. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wen Qingchuan clearly did not expect Shen Sangyu's condition to be so severe, and allowed the doctor to educate him in the ward. Fortunately, it was delivered in time. "Tonight, I will have some fever-reducing medication administered, and I can go back tomorrow when I return to normal." After the doctor's education, he turned his head again. Wen Qingchuan nodded and said, "I will take good care of her." The doctor gave 2 more instructions and left, and the ward returned to calm. The wound on Shen Sangyu's forehead had been replaced with new gauze, and he had a hanging bottle on his hand. When he arrived, he was talking nonsense, and his eyebrows gradually relaxed. Until the next morning, Shen Sangyu slowly woke up. As soon as I opened my eyes, the door of the ward opened. Wen Qingchuan held a lunch box in his hand. "Wake up. How do you feel now? You can have some congee first, and I'll call the doctor." Before Shen Sangyu could speak, Wen Qingchuan handed her the lunch box and walked out of the door to call for a doctor. After the doctor arrived, he underwent a thorough examination. "The temperature has already dropped, and you can be discharged after the infusion. However, this female comrade's head injury still needs to be treated every 3 days. Take a note of Wen Qingchuan." Shen Sangyu's body did not feel the same discomfort as last night, except for occasional pain from the wound on his head. Last night, after falling asleep, she felt scorching all over and realized that she might have had a high fever due to an inflammation in her wound. She opened her mouth to seek help, but to her surprise, her throat couldn't speak at all. Fortunately, Qingchuan promptly discovered and sent himself to the hospital. Shen Sangyu's eyes were filled with gratitude towards Qingchuan, but at the same time, he wondered how Qingchuan had discovered his discomfort in time. Perhaps Shen Sangyu's exploration gaze was too direct. Qingchuan tidied up the blanket he brought last night and looked at Shen Sangyu, saying, "What's wrong?" Shen Sangyu, who was caught peeking, blushed and didn't dare to ask. She quickly shook her head and said, "Hurry home, I want to go back to sleep." The hospital rest is not very good. The most important thing is that she sweated all over last night and felt very uncomfortable with her sticky body. Qingchuan had no meaning about this, and after packing up their things, the two of them left the hospital. He returned to the army this morning and took a day off. Thinking of Shen Sangyu's head injury, he passed by the supply and marketing cooperative and bought 2 pounds of pork ribs with a meat ticket. Shen Sangyu walked slowly, and Qingchuan didn't urge him either. He walked slowly by Shen Sangyu's side. Just as they were passing by a small river, they suddenly heard a burst of heart-wrenching cries. Listening to the sound on the Qingchuan River, I looked up and found that the riverbank ahead was covered with people. When I lowered my eyes, I saw a child constantly splashing in the water, and the cold river water was almost drowning the child's head. The mother of the child cried heartbroken on the riverbank, almost unable to stand still. At this moment, the surroundings are full of onlookers, but they are all gathered around to watch the excitement. At this moment, the mother of the child suddenly saw Qingchuan and her eyes lit up. She grabbed Qingchuan's arm like a life-saving straw and said, "Captain Wen, please save my tiger. My tiger has been falling for 7 or 8 minutes, sobbing. If he were gone, I wouldn't be alive." At the moment Shen Sangyu saw the mother of the child, he felt a bit coincidental. Because this person is Chao Ruyue, one of the women who was discussing herself downstairs yesterday afternoon. At the moment when Qingchuan saw the child fall into the water, he didn't hesitate at all. He took off his military coat and jumped into the water with a splash. The child in Zhongjiang was picked up. The winter in 49 cities is extremely cold. A few days ago, there was a snowfall, and now there is a shallow layer of ice residue on the river surface. When the child was successfully rescued ashore, his face turned white and blue, his belly was bulging, and he was clearly out of breath. Upon seeing that the situation was not good, Qingchuan quickly said, "Take me to the hospital." "Wait." Suddenly, Shen Sangyu, who had been watching, suddenly spoke up. Qingchuan didn't expect Shen Sangyu to suddenly make a sound. Upon hearing this, he frowned. Shen Sangyu quickly said, "It takes 10 minutes to send the child to the hospital, but the golden rescue time for drowning is only 4 minutes. Shen Sangyu's words were like putting a death sentence on a child. Chao Ruyue immediately burst into tears. However, before everyone could react, Shen Sangyu suddenly knelt on the ground, pressing his hands towards Huzi's chest. "What are you doing?" Chao Ruyue was momentarily blinded. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation is the most commonly used method in modern times. Although Shen Sangyu is not a doctor, his first research with his mentor was on medical equipment, during which he learned many emergency methods for special situations. Chao Ruyue wanted to pull Shen Sangyu apart, but Shen Sangyu remained motionless and rhythmically performed cardiopulmonary compressions. At the same time, Shen Sangyu quickly cleared some mud and vomit from the mouth and nose of Huzi. Chao Ruyue originally wanted to stop it, but inexplicably felt that Shen Sangyu's movements were professional and froze in place. Qingchuan was a bit worried about the child, but when he hesitated to see Shen Sangyu's professional movements, a soft voice suddenly appeared in the crowd. "What's going on?" Shen Sangyu felt that the voice was unusually familiar. He looked up and saw a tall woman wearing a black coat walking over, only to find that this person was Zhou Xinghua, who had caused a hole in the original owner's head. Zhou Xinghua didn't notice Shen Sangyu. As soon as he entered the crowd, the first thing he saw was a lifeless child lying on the ground. He was startled and said, "Sister Chow, did your tiger fall into the water? What are you still doing? Hurry up and take it to the hospital." Chow Ruyue instantly realized that compared to the ignorant Shen Sangyu, she was more willing to believe in Zhou Xinghua. You should know that Zhou Xinghua used to work as a nurse before. Not now. Shen Sangyu kept giving first aid to the child for a moment, focusing on the situation of Huzi except for a glance at Zhou Xinghua just now. When Qingchuan, Tiger Mother, the child is still saved, believe me. Shen Sangyu, drowning is not a joke. I used to be a nurse, and sending someone to the hospital in this situation is the best choice. You shut up. Shen Sangyu suddenly interrupted Zhou Xinghua's speech, and then she spoke clearly without lifting her head. The tiger has been in the water for nearly 7 or 8 minutes, so it won't be possible to take it directly to the hospital in time. When Qingchuan, can you find a car? CPR cannot stop. The current medical technology is not advanced, and the golden 4-minute rescue theory also needs to be based on the condition of complete medical equipment. The economy of the 4 or 9 cities is not low nationwide, but now there is simply no money to purchase good medical equipment. Therefore, before being sent to the hospital, cardiopulmonary resuscitation is the last hope. Zhou Xinghua frowned and looked at Shen Sangyu's gaze as if it were an immature child. She couldn't help but say to Wen Qingchuan, when I was a nurse before, there was a child who also fell into the water, but he couldn't be rescued because he wasn't sent to the hospital in time. But now that the hospital is so close to us, there is still hope. Sangyu, don't be stubborn anymore. Who will be responsible for the child's problems when the time comes? Shen Sangyu turned a deaf ear and continued to lie on the ground performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. When Qingchuan looked at Shen Sangyu and was inexplicably infected by Shen Sangyu's words, "You believe me?" Without hesitation, when Qingchuan said, "I believe in Sangyu. If anything happens to Huzi, I will take responsibility." Zhou Xinghua instantly widened his eyes and looked at Wen Qingchuan incredulously, "You're crazy." Man is not someone Wen Qingchuan insisted on saving, what responsibility does he bear? Shen Sangyu also suddenly raised his head, but was stunned for a moment before lowering his head to continue CPR. The next moment, Huzi, whose eyes were originally tightly closed, suddenly spat out a large puddle of water, mixed with a lot of mud and dirty water, and her round belly instantly flattened a lot. Huzi didn't know what had happened, but he felt a swelling and pain in his chest, and his whole body was extremely uncomfortable. He immediately burst into tears. Chapter 4 Wen Qingchuan. I believe in you. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. The child is alive. Intense cheers erupted from the crowd. Zhou Xinghua looked at this scene, incredulously at Shen Sangyu. Is this still Shen Sangyu, who is ignorant and works like heaven and earth? Shen Sangyu ignored the voices and shocked expressions of the people around her. At this moment, Huzi's stomach gradually began to rise and fall, and she breathed a complete sigh of relief. Chow Ruyue heard the weak voice of Huzi and immediately cried while holding the child, while constantly thanking Shen Sangyu. She felt a little fortunate in her heart that she didn't listen to Zhou Xing's painting and was sent directly to the hospital, otherwise her son might not have been saved. Shen Sangyu underwent nearly 10 minutes of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but her hands felt a bit weak. The child's life is just not in danger for the time being, so we need to quickly send him to the hospital for observation for 24 hours. After all, he has been in the water for so long, so we need to prevent the occurrence of other diseases. By the way, I also took a chest X-ray to see if I could break the child's rib to save his life. At this moment, Chow Ruyue nodded quickly as she saw Shen Sangyu being like a benefactor to the reconstruction. A military vehicle happened to stop by the roadside to check the situation. Upon learning that the child had fallen into the water and was about to be taken to the hospital, Chao Ruyue immediately asked him to hold the tiger in his arms and board the vehicle. Shen Sangyu knelt on the ground and couldn't get up for half a day. The original owner's health was not good. Just now, when the cold wind blew, she felt her head start to hurt again. "Are you okay?" When Qingchuan lowered his head and looked at Shen Sangyu lying on the ground, but did not immediately reach out his hand. Although he felt that Shen Sangyu was a bit different, he still remembered that Shen Sangyu didn't like him to get close. Shen Sangyu didn't have so many thoughts, and considering that she and Wen Qingchuan were just strangers, she instinctively waved her hand and said, "I'm okay." Shen Sangyu suddenly paused and saw that Wen Qingchuan's whole body was wet, and he could vaguely see the squirting abdominal muscles, but it was obvious that he was not paying attention to this moment. On such a cold day, when Qingchuan was only wearing a thin short-sleeved shirt. She was afraid of the cold, so she wore a thick gray cotton jacket, which made her look a bit bulky. On the contrary, when Qingchuan was dressed in military green short sleeves and only wore a coat on the outside. When he saved someone, he took off his coat, but the clothes and pants inside were already soaked through. "Hurry home and change your clothes. Don't catch a cold on such a cold day." When Qingchuan was taken aback for a moment. In the past, Shen Sangyu either asked for money or argued with him every day. This was the first time she cared about him. When Qingchuan nodded in surprise and favor, but his face remained unchanged. Shen Sangyu did not notice any abnormalities. The two of them spoke to each other, even forgetting that there was a Zhou Xing painting behind them. Zhou Xinghua's face looked ugly, but when he heard Wen Qingchuan's clothes getting wet, his eyes lit up and he said, "Brother Wen, why don't you go to my house to change clothes? You haven't been sitting at home for a long time." Speaking, Zhou Xinghua still feels a bit aggrieved. Upon seeing this scene, Shen Sangyu's mind instantly flashed with the words, "White Lotus." The original owner fell down the stairs that day, and many memories were a bit confused. Shen Sangyu had just traveled and didn't have time to think much, but in fact, he had always been a little puzzled in his heart. There was no intersection between Zhou Xinghua and the original owner, but on the day they had a conflict, the other party said something that made the original owner fight against Zhou Xinghua. Shen Sangyu rubbed his head, and when Qingchuan beside him thought Shen Sangyu was not feeling well. He didn't have time to think about why he thought Zhou Xinghua's words sounded strange. "No need, Sangyu is not feeling well." Zhou Xinghua looks ugly, glances at the gauze on Shen Sangyu's head, and suddenly says, "I was not good that day. I knew that you wanted to send you a bowl of chicken noodles and soup on your birthday, but who knows that Sangyu misunderstood me." Shen Sangyu was stunned and couldn't believe that these words were spoken from Zhou Xing's mouth. She couldn't help rolling her eyes. Who would like a girl from another family to give her husband a chicken noodles in soup for his birthday? "I didn't know that when Qingchuan was your husband." Zhou Xinghua was struck by his thoughts, and he didn't expect Shen Sangyu to say these words in public. His face blushed for a moment and he said, "Sangyu, you misunderstood. I don't have such thoughts." Speaking, a pair of eyes looked at Wen Qingchuan as if seeking help. That look can be as pitiful as it seems. Shen Sangyu just wanted to chuckle a few times, and suddenly felt that the original owner's head injury might not have been an accident. She just had a severe headache and didn't want to talk much to Zhou Xinghua. She turned around and walked towards the courtyard, with Wen Qingchuan following behind Shen Sangyu without saying a word. After returning to the family courtyard, everyone watched as Shen Sangyu and Wen Qingchuan returned together, and Wen Qingchuan was all wet with gossip on their faces. But Wen Qingchuan always has a cold face on weekdays, and furthermore, he holds higher positions than many people in the courtyard, so no one dares to ask in the courtyard. After Wen Qingchuan returned to his room, he wiped his body dry and changed into a clean piece of clothing before quickly cooking. Wen Qingchuan has good craftsmanship, and soon the aroma of stewed pork ribs came from the corridor. Shen Sangyu was originally thinking about Zhou Xing's painting, but when she smelled the strong aroma of pork ribs, the flowing water flowed greedily. Suction slip, Shen Sangyu's craving insects are almost coming out. She eagerly watched as when Qingchuan walked in with a clay pot, opened the lid, and could see a little oily light on the pork rib soup. The aroma that came rushing in made Shen Sangyu instinctively swallow his saliva. At this moment, when Qingchuan suddenly said, "The relationship between me and Zhou Xinghua is not what you think." Shen Sangyu paused for a moment and stared blankly at Wen Qingchuan. It wasn't until I realized it that when Qingchuan was explaining to me. However, when Qingchuan saw Shen Sangyu stunned, he thought he didn't believe him and quickly explained, "Zhou Xinghua's husband is my comrade in arms. A year ago, Zhuang Yuliang sacrificed himself and entrusted me to take care of Zhou Xinghua and his son. Therefore, on the third day of each month, I will go to her house to see if there is anything I need help with." Shen Sangyu didn't expect this to happen in the middle. So Zhou Xinghua treated himself as a rival in love. Suddenly, a few blurry fragments flashed through his memory, and Shen Sangyu's face changed again and again. When Qingchuan felt guilty when he saw Shen Sangyu's appearance. He had never thought about anything else before, and today he realized that he might have caused Zhou Xinghua to have inappropriate thoughts. No matter how you apologize now, things have already happened. I will explain it clearly to Zhou Xinghua. Tell me clearly. How can you tell me clearly? She has found her home to send you chicken soup noodles and asked me to divorce you. I don't agree with her and she wants to kill me. Upon hearing this, Qingchuan was startled. She looked at Shen Sangyu, who suddenly became furious, and a hint of speculation surged in her heart. Sure enough, the next second Shen Sangyu said, "I didn't even push her downstairs. She rolled down on her own. Since she traveled here, she has been in a daze and can't remember many things clearly." But just now the memory appeared in his mind, and it was only then that Shen Sangyu remembered that it was not like what was said in the courtyard. "On the day you left the mission, Zhou Xinghua came to me and said I didn't deserve you. We had an argument at the stairwell, and she said, but I slapped me and pushed me down. Zhou Xinghua fell on her own, so I never pushed her." When Qingchuan was noticeably stunned when he heard Shen Sangyu's words. On the day Shen Sangyu had an accident, he received a task and hurriedly went out, so all kinds of reasons were transmitted from the family courtyard. "So, why didn't you mention it when everyone misunderstood you before?" Shen Sangyu paused. After she wore it over, her memory was incomplete, and she couldn't recall the crucial moments. Besides, the original owner is notorious throughout the entire courtyard. Who would believe her words? However, when Qingchuan only furrowed his brow slightly. Even if Shen Sangyu didn't say it, he knew that the reason why Shen Sangyu didn't say it was because no one would believe him. "Tomorrow, let's go find Zhou Xinghua and explain clearly. If it's really her pushing you, I will definitely make her apologize to you." Shen Sangyu looked up in shock, with a hint of disbelief in his eyes. "Do you believe me?" After when Qingchuan finished speaking, he felt a bit unbelievable. In the past, he would not have believed it, but after Shen Sangyu insisted on saving Huzi just now, when Qingchuan felt that perhaps he could try to trust this wife whom he didn't know much about. Thinking of this, when Qingchuan nodded and said, I believe you." Chapter 5. Truth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Now it was Shen Sangyu's turn to be stunned. She knew how bad the original owner's temper was. In the past 3 months, when Qingchuan worked tirelessly and made various compromises to the original owner. In fact, it was more because of responsibility that he did so. Now when Qingchuan actually says he believes in himself. Shen Sangyu's apricot eyes were full of surprise. However, thinking of the original owner's temper, he immediately arrogantly said, "Who wants you to believe me? But now that you are my husband, you will have to take care of my food and drink in the future. Don't flirt with those women every day, otherwise I will be impolite to you." When Qingchuan didn't seem angry at all. Seeing Shen Sangyu's clean meal, he asked, have you finished? Shen Sangyu didn't react and nodded honestly. Then the man stood up and tidied up the dishes, saying, you still need to recover from the injury on your head for a while. Hurry up and go rest. After finishing speaking, I couldn't help but look at my little wife who seemed to have changed. Don't be angry, I didn't flirt with other women. The training ground is filled with old men, and the women he has seen in his life can be said to be one of the few. And just now, although Shen Sangyu spoke arrogantly, he looked like a cat cub who was uneasy about the environment, making him unable to help but speak out to comfort him. After when Qingchuan finished speaking, he walked into the kitchen. Shen Sangyu wanted to come forward and help, but seeing Wen Qingchuan's clean appearance, he didn't need him. So she turned around and returned to the bedroom. Before crossing the river, her research project was a race against time, so she didn't have the habit of taking a nap. The layout of the bedroom room is very simple, about 20 square meters, with a large bed in the middle, a bedside table on each side, and an old-fashioned wardrobe next to it. However, by this time, the clothes were already fully packed. You don't have to guess to know it's the original owner. Because when Qingchuan only has a regular uniform, the rest are military uniforms, so his position is pitifully small. Shen Sangyu glanced at the clothes in the wardrobe, they were colorful and not a single one was beautiful. She remembers that these were all foreign dresses that her good friends accompanied her to the supply and marketing agency to buy, and a single dress would cost 10 or 20 yuan. Shen's father was quite generous with his daughter, so the original owner was quite generous. Shen Sangyu was very disgusted with the clothes in the wardrobe, and finally found a white long dress and pajamas. Shen Sangyu put them on and lay in bed. I thought I wouldn't sleep, but after just lying in bed for a while, I slept until the next morning. The next morning, Shen Sangyu was awakened by the sound of the horn waking up. Shen Sangyu opened his eyes in a daze and saw that the living room outside the bedroom had already been lit up. Winter is a bit cold, and Shen Sangyu doesn't really want to get up, but she slept for more than 10 hours continuously, which made her energetic when she woke up. Are you awake? As soon as Shen Sangyu opened the bedroom door, he heard Qingchuan and asked. When Qingchuan's amber eyes glanced at Shen Sangyu. Today there is only mantou. If you want to eat steamed buns, I will take you to the canteen later. Shen Sangyu instantly realized and quickly went over to sit down. She picked up a big white fat mantou and took a bite. I can eat mantou. Generally speaking, she doesn't eat breakfast, but she didn't eat anything after she went to bed yesterday afternoon. Now she eats mantou and pickles. Shen Sangyu ate 2 mantou at a stretch, and then said, I want to go shopping in the street later. It shouldn't be too hot today, when Qingchuan said. Shen Sangyu's eyes were puzzled. Today I'll take you to find Zhou Xinghua, let's clarify the matter. When Qingchuan didn't mention it, but Shen Sangyu almost forgot about it. She nodded and said, okay, then I'll go shopping tomorrow. She will eventually replace all the colorful clothes in the original owner's cabinet. When Qingchuan took a deep look at Shen Sangyu and hesitated to speak. But in the end, nothing was said. He had already taken off yesterday, but thinking of what Shen Sangyu said yesterday, he took another day off. Fortunately, in previous years when he didn't go home, the leader was very generous and approved a fake note. When Qingchuan brought Shen Sangyu to Zhou Xinghua's home. After Zhou Xinghua's husband Zhuang Yuliang sacrificed himself, the originally allocated house was taken by Zhuang Yuliang's elder brother. Now, Zhou Xinghua can only live with her child at her mother's house. Zhou Xinghua's parents both hold military positions, and the assigned house is the best in the courtyard, not far from their residence. It only takes 4 or 5 minutes to walk there. When Qingchuan knocked on the door of the Zhou family, Zhou Xinghua opened the door and saw Wen Qingchuan with visible joy on his face. Why did you come, Qingchuan? It's not yet the 3rd, is it? As she spoke, her gaze suddenly caught sight of Shen Sangyu behind Wen Qingchuan, and the woman's smile instantly solidified. Shen Sangyu tilted his head when he saw Zhou Xing smile and smiled slightly. Just now, she saw a hint of guilt flashing in the other person's eyes. What is the feeling of feeling guilty during the day? Shen Sangyu saw through but didn't poke through. She remembered all the memories of that day. Although the original owner has a bad temper in the courtyard and has offended many people, it is not her fault. Don't let her bear it. In her previous life, there were indeed some social issues with her, but Shen Sangyu was not a fool. Seeing that Zhou Xinghua wanted them to go in, Shen Sangyu didn't seem to agree with the other person. She smiled and said, "It's not a big deal, let's talk about it here. This is the busiest time in the courtyard." Some of the military sister.In.Law downstairs went to work, while others led their own children to school. When they saw someone standing at the door of Zhou Xing's painter, they couldn't help but stop and take a look. As soon as it turned out to be Shen Sangyu from the neighboring family courtyard, he immediately stood there and didn't leave. In no time, the staircase was blocked and filled with water. Zhou Xing clasped his 10 fingers around the flesh of his palm and looked at Shen Sangyu, who seemed to be smiling but not smiling, with a hint of unease in his heart. "I'm going to send Tong Tong to school later. Why don't you come and sit down first and talk to me when I come back?" "No need, it won't take you long either." Shen Sangyu pretended to be the original owner and said directly, "Last time you pushed me down, but now there are rumors in the family courtyard that I pushed you down. Please clarify with everyone quickly." The original owner was originally an unpleasant personality, so she was outspoken and no one thought there was anything wrong with her. On the contrary, Shen Sangyu's angry appearance made everyone exclaim in surprise. Zhou Xinghua could feel the gaze around him like a knife falling on him, and his face instantly turned pale. Why did Shen Sangyu remember again? I don't know what you're talking about. Everyone saw it that day, and it's clear that you pushed me down. Zhou Xinghua only panicked for 3 seconds and quickly regained his composure. Anyway, someone happened to see it that day, and Shen Sangyu couldn't provide any evidence at all. Chapter 6. Collection of Accounts. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. Shen Sangyu was not surprised by Zhou Xinghua's denial of this matter. Although the original owner may have indulged in some things on a daily basis, he will definitely not target anyone for no reason. In her memory, since marrying when Qingchuan, there have been more and more rumors that are unfavorable to her, and even once the original owner encountered Zhou Xinghua spreading rumors about her. But Zhou Xinghua was very clever. The original owner went crazy and scolded her, pretending to be pitiful, which led to more and more rumors spreading in the courtyard. This time, it was also Zhou Xinghua's intention to guide and mislead everyone. After all, the spiciness of the original owner is evident to all. Zhou Xinghua said so, and Shen Sangyu didn't panic either. She originally wanted to solve it on her own, but to her surprise, when Qingchuan asked first, "What did you say to Shen Sangyu that day that you started taking action?" Upon hearing this, Zhou Xing's face was filled with disbelief. "Qingchuan, I really didn't say anything. How dare she say that she stimulated Shen Sangyu by celebrating Wen Qingchuan's birthday?" Upon seeing Zhou Xinghua's face, Wen Qingchuan had a clear idea. His face instantly darkened and he said, "Since I didn't say anything or do anything, what are you doing at the family building?" If it had been before, Wen Qingchuan would never have believed that Zhou Xinghua was such a person. After all, Zhou Xinghua is his own wife. He is usually friendly to everyone he meets. If it weren't for what Shen Sangyu suddenly told him yesterday, he wouldn't have believed that Zhou Xinghua still has such a side. Even though he left early and returned late, he knew that Shen Sangyu had a bad reputation in the family courtyard. Wen Qingchuan is not a saint, and now it is his wife who has been wronged. Of course, he wants to ask Zhou Xinghua for an explanation. Wen Qingchuan's words also stunned everyone suddenly, and then it seemed like a sudden realization. Yes, what is Zhou Xinghua doing to go find someone to listen to the group leader? Some military sister.In.Law who knew some insider information immediately changed their gaze. They know that Zhou Xinghua likes Wen Qingchuan. Although Wen Qingchuan's family background is not good, his abilities and personality are both good. Unexpectedly, he later killed Shen Sangyu. Although everyone feels regretful, after all, it is not appropriate for Zhou Xinghua to pursue the leader who has already married his wife. Zhou Xinghua felt a bit embarrassed on his face, and tears immediately fell down. Qingchuan, don't you know what kind of person I am? You take such care of me and Tong Tong. I just want you to eat longevity noodles on your birthday. After all, I heard that Sangyu doesn't open fire at home. You can't eat hot food on weekdays. Who knows, Sangyu misunderstood me. Zhou Xinghua spoke with a very uncomfortable expression on his face. Shen Sangyu has never seen such an shameless person before. How could it be misunderstood? No wonder the original owner's reputation in the courtyard is getting worse and worse. Zhou Xinghua, did you say I pushed you? Shen Sangyu took a deep breath and asked. Zhou Xinghua was stunned for a moment, not knowing what Shen Sangyu was going to say, but his face was very firm. I, Zhou Xinghua, never lie. Shen Sangyu nodded and said, that's good. Amidst Zhou Xinghua's bewildered expression, Shen Sangyu pulled Wen Qingchuan to the staircase. Wen Qingchuan felt a cold and soft hand in his hand freeze for a moment, but still kept up with Shen Sangyu's footsteps. After the couple stood face to face, Shen Sangyu turned his head and asked, we were standing opposite each other back then, weren't we? Zhou Xinghua frowned, but nodded under so many gazes. She gradually had a bad premonition in her heart. Then she saw a smile on Shen Sangyu's face and said to the gossiping crowd, these days everyone has heard rumors that I fell off because I pushed Zhou Xinghua, but what I want to tell everyone today is that Shen Sangyu definitely doesn't recognize anything I haven't done before. Zhou Xinghua is standing at the staircase. May I ask if I push her, is it because she should be the one with a higher chance of getting hurt? But why is she unharmed? Everyone was taken aback. Yes, just hearing about the position between Qingchuan and Shen Sangyu, it seems that Zhou Xinghua, who is facing away from the ground, landed first. But now it is clear that Shen Sangyu's head has been injured, and there are faint blood stains on the gauze on his forehead. Zhou Xinghua went to send longevity noodles to Wan, the head of the delegation. Now Shen Sangyu says that again, the eyes of people have changed completely. The people nowadays have a simple and honest style, and they can't stand people like Zhou Xinghua the most. Someone in the crowd spoke up, Captain Wan, to put it mildly, it's a misunderstanding between neighbors, but to put it bluntly, it's murder. Yeah, on the day Sangyu had an accident, she shed a lot of blood. I almost thought she couldn't do it anymore. As everyone spoke, Zhou Xinghua fell into an ice cave. When Qingchuan looked at Zhou Xinghua and asked, is Sangyu right? Zhou Xinghua argued, but many people were present at the time and they saw Shen Sangyu pushing me. Then bring them over again, let's confront each other again. Shen Sangyu's eyes were cold and cold. I've said before, you can't let me admit it if it's not me, Shen Sangyu. Let go, let go. As soon as Shen Sangyu finished speaking, a tall man in his 50s squeezed in from the crowd, followed by several timid military maids. After a moment of confusion, Shen Sangyu immediately recognized the man as the political commissar of the military region, named Lin Hua. And the people he brought, Shen Sangyu was somewhat familiar and always felt like he had seen them somewhere before. Qingchuan, what do you want me to find these people for? Lin Hua saw so many people gathered here and said gently to everyone, it's already quite late. What should I do? Although Lin Hua is tall in stature, he is one of the few intellectuals in the entire military region and is a gentle person. Upon seeing this, Shen Sangyu suddenly remembered that the several military sister.In.Law in front of him were the ones who slandered him and pushed Zhou Xing down the stairs. But how did they come? Shen Sangyu couldn't help but look at Wen Qingchuan. Wen Qingchuan didn't hide anything. Last night when you fell asleep, I contacted political commissar Lin and asked him to bring someone over. Shen Sangyu didn't even think of this kind of relationship himself, and didn't expect Qingchuan to be so careful. Although political commissar Lin didn't know what had happened, he knocked on the doors early this morning and invited all the military sister.In.Law who testified. Lin Hua turned around and looked at several military sister.In.Law, saying, "Today I asked you to come back and think about the day when Shen Sangyu and Zhou Xinghua had a conflict. Did you really see with your own eyes that Shen Sangyu pushed Zhou Xinghua down?" The military sister.In.Law looked at each other, but no one dared to speak at this moment. After a while, a slightly chubby woman finally spoke confidently, "We did see them arguing downstairs, and then Comrade Shen Sangyu suddenly screamed and pushed Zhou Xinghua." Lin Hua frowned and looked at Qingchuan and Shen Sangyu. However, Shen Sangyu remained calm at all. She asked the military sister.In.Law who was speaking, "At most, you could only see the back of Zhou Xinghua from where you were standing. How can you be sure that it wasn't Zhou Xinghua who pushed me first, or rather? You're lying." Chapter 7. Tearing White Lotus by Hand. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With Shen Sangyu's words, the slightly chubby military sister.In.Law's face instantly turned pale, and her gaze looked vaguely at Zhou Xinghua. Shen Sangyu sneered. This military sister.In.Law is a well-known gossip in the courtyard, and she is usually the closest to Zhou Xinghua. She had previously surveyed the terrain, and what these military sisters said was completely different from what they could see. The military sister.In.Law's face suddenly turned ugly and she retorted, "I didn't." No lies. Who believes it? Shen Sangyu rolled her beautiful white eyes and said in silence, "You and Zhou Xinghua have such a good relationship on weekdays, and you always say bad things about me. Who knows if you're lying?" The original owner was not an easy bully, and now Shen Sangyu's face was mocking and harassing, and everyone didn't find it strange. On the contrary, the onlookers couldn't help but think of what Shen Sangyu had just said. Saying there is no doubt is false. One time was an accident, what were those 2 times? Just as there was no judgment on the matter, a thin and small military sister.In.Law suddenly whispered, report, I actually didn't see it." Shen Sangyu heard the words and looked over. The military sister.In.Law who spoke was just over 1 meter 6, very thin, with 2 fried dough twists braids, and looked very ordinary. But Shen Sangyu remembered that Zhang Wenhui had no sense of existence in the family compound. The reason why she remembered was that the original owner saw Zhang Wenhui saying that the other party was a ground beetle. No one expected Zhang Wenhui to speak up. Zhang Wenhui's face turned even redder as she saw everyone looking at her. Except for Zhao Yener who saw Shen Sangyu pushing Zhou Xinghua down, we didn't see anything. We were originally wearing scarves downstairs, but we heard arguments and loud noises above. By the time we heard screams, Shen Sangyu and Zhou Xinghua had already rolled down the stairs. After listening, Shen Sangyu's heart was filled with emotion. Good people. Although I have a way to prove my innocence, what others say is even more proof that Zhao Yener and Zhou Xinghua are talking. Lin Hua was not a fool and immediately asked, "What are they arguing about?" Zhang Wenhui lowered her head, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Zhou Xinghua sent something to Captain Wan," and then said. He also said that Shen Sangyu is not worthy of Captain Wan, and asked Shen Sangyu to divorce Captain Wan. Zhou Xinghua's heart skipped a beat and he quickly spoke up, "I never said such a thing." Shen Sangyu said, "You never said we would get into a fight. Aren't you just looking at me in the courtyard with a bad reputation? I'll tell you Zhou Xinghua. If you don't apologize to me today, I'll come to your house every day and make trouble." She said, her eyes turning red as she looked at the other person, as if she had suffered a great deal of injustice. Isn't it just pretending to be pitiful, who wouldn't? Before, when she didn't have enough research funding, the teacher would take her to cry with her leaders every day. Crying also requires acting skills. She has been practicing to perfection for so many years. When Qingchuan didn't expect Shen Sangyu to cry. In his memory, she never cried even if she was angry with him every day. A hint of strangeness flashed in his heart, and when Qingchuan hesitated for a moment before coming forward to comfort him, "Don't cry." He originally wanted to reach out to comfort, but when he thought that Shen Sangyu didn't like him, he could only stand by her side and gently comfort her. Upon hearing the sound, Shen Sangyu instinctively lifted his head, only to find that when Qingchuan was also looking at her. When Qingchuan looked at his daughter.In.Law's bright red eyes as clear as a deer, and his heart was filled with guilt. It was his responsibility to marry Shen Sangyu. He thought that if she didn't want to leave that day, he would definitely give her enough money to let her go. As for the rumors in the courtyard, he actually believed them. After all, living together for 3 months, he knows better than anyone what the character of this little wife is. But just now when he saw Shen Sangyu's gaze, he suddenly thought to himself that what happened today was someone else's fault. What about other rumors? Is it also spread by others? Anyway, he did not fulfill his obligations as a husband and the care he deserved. When Qingchuan's face turned slightly cold and he said to Zhou Xing, "Since Miss Zhou doesn't admit it, let's go to the police station with me." Go to the police station. Zhou Xinghua's face turned pale instantly. She didn't expect when Qingchuan to be willing to report Shen Sangyu to the police. "Qingchuan, don't even you believe it?" When Qingchuan remained silent and had a very firm attitude. Shen Sangyu nodded and said, "Exactly, this. Zhao Yener sister.In.Law, could you also come with us to the police station?" Zhao Yener was the chubby military sister.In.Law, and when she heard that she was also going together, her face changed dramatically. "Why did I go with you? I'm not going. If you say it's Zhou Xinghua that I recommended, then you're the witness. Of course, you want to go with us." Shen Sangyu almost couldn't laugh when he saw the other party's frightened appearance, and then added a touch of anger. "Mrs. Zhao is very well behaved. What are you afraid of going to the police station for? Since she hasn't lied, she won't go to jail. What are you afraid of?" Unexpectedly, upon hearing these words, Zhao Yener immediately broke through the defense. She didn't expect the situation to be so serious. "How can I get a certificate? And then I'll go to jail." Shen Sangyu kindly corrected, "Only by obtaining false evidence can one be imprisoned. She's actually just talking nonsense. It's okay to ask her to do scientific research, but she doesn't even know what the 1978 law was like." But Zhao Yener also doesn't know. She almost sat down and trembled, saying, I'm not going, I didn't see anything. If she goes to jail, what will she do in the future?" Zhao Yener thought about it and suddenly looked at Zhou Xinghua, shouting loudly, "Xinghua, you have caused me so much trouble." Before Zhou Xinghua could speak, Zhao Yener continued, "It was Zhou Xinghua who made me say that. I actually didn't see anything. I don't want to go to the police station to testify. TSK. Shen Sangyu couldn't help but glance at Zhou Xinghua, whose face was pale with iron, and said, "The truth has come to light." At this moment, Zhou Xinghua's face was quite ugly, surrounded by the voices of his military sister.In.Law discussing him. At this moment, the 2 elders who heard the sound outside came out. Zhou's father saw so many people gathered at the doorstep and looked at his daughter's expression, his face a bit unhappy. "Qingchuan, what's going on?" Zhou's father held a prestigious official position in the courtyard, and when Qingchuan held him in great respect. He was just about to speak when he caught a glimpse of a black figure suddenly darting out and rushing straight toward Shen Sangyu. "Be careful, Sangyu." When Qingchuan was quick-witted, but still one step late. Shen Sangyu was repeatedly pushed back by the collision, but fortunately, when Qingchuan pulled her and didn't let her fall. Looking down, a young boy of 5 or 6 years old opened his hands and blocked the Zhou Xing frame, looking at her fiercely at the moment. Shen Sangyu immediately guessed that the child should be Tong Tong, the son of Zhou Xinghua. Bad woman, don't bully my mother. Tong Tong's eyes were filled with hatred, with a pair of eyes staring at Shen Sangyu. I have never seen her before, yet I hate her so much. Shen Sangyu thought she respected the elderly and loved the young enough, but she couldn't like the child in front of her. She didn't hesitate to say, "Who bullied your mother?" "It's clear that your mother bullied me." After finishing speaking, feeling frustrated, he said, "You also bully me, you are also a bad kid." Everyone. What are you arguing about with a child? But when I thought it was Shen Sangyu, it seemed reasonable again. Shen Sangyu actually has his own ideas. Although the original owner did some things, he has never done anything that would harm heaven or reason, and sin never leads to death. I don't know if the original owner is still there. If he's not there, then Zhou Xinghua is deliberately murdered. No matter what, she will still vent her anger for the original owner and herself. Chapter 8. Having money. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After Shen Sangyu finished speaking, Tong Tong looked at her incredulously. Shen Sangyu didn't hesitate to glare back. After all, there is no law that requires her to give birth to the child. As for quality, what does it matter to Shen Sangyu? Tong Tong's father passed away since childhood, and both the leaders and the military sister.In.Law in the courtyard took great care of him. No one has ever been so cruel to him before. He looked fiercely at Shen Sangyu and suddenly let out a sharp cry. Zhou Xinghua also shed tears, and the mother and son suffered great injustice. When Zhou's father saw his daughter and grandson being treated like this, his face immediately turned black and he said, "Get out of here, both of you." At this moment, Tong Tong also shouted loudly, "It was you who stole Uncle One from me." Before he could finish speaking, Tong Tong suddenly let out two whimpers. Zhou Xinghua's face turned pale and he quickly covered Tong Tong's mouth, but in the end, it was too late and everyone listened clearly. Tong Tong has never seen Shen Sangyu a few times, how could he say the word, grab? If there were no adults around to say something, they wouldn't believe it. Upon hearing these words, when Qingchuan furrowed his brows and felt a tingling sensation in his heart. Children are all educated by Zhou Xinghua, what about the others in the courtyard? How much injustice has Shen Sangyu suffered in the past 3 months? Thinking of this, when Qingchuan's expression changed and he looked at Tong Tong with an extremely serious tone. Tong Tong, I don't care what your mother said to you, but I want to tell you that Shen Sangyu has never taken anyone away. She and I are wives who have reported marriage to the authorities, not bad women as you say. Tong Tong looked at Wen Qingchuan in shock with his big watery eyes open. Suddenly, he cried loudly, "No. She took Uncle away. Uncle will become my father in the future." Tong Tong. Zhou Xinghua couldn't stop Tong Tong from speaking outside. Excited, he raised his hand high and slapped Tong Tong in the face. Tong Tong was stunned for a moment, feeling the burning pain on his face and crying non-stop. Shen Sangyu showed no remorse or even pity towards Tong Tong. Zhou Xinghua, you really have ulterior motives in your heart. I see how long you'll have to argue. Shen Sangyu shouted loudly, wishing all the passing dogs would come over and take a look. Seeing more and more people around him, Shen Sangyu said, I was not sensible before, but I have never done anything outrageous. I am doing a good job. Could you please help me report to the police and have them investigate? Zhou Xinghua's eyes were instantly flustered when he saw Shen Sangyu coming. She originally intended to grab Shen Sangyu's hand, but was cleverly avoided by the other party. Don't call the police. Shen Sangyu looked up and said, do you admit it or not? Zhou Xinghua bit his lips, feeling very conflicted inside. She didn't expect Shen Sangyu, who looked like a 205, to be so sharp lately, and to have to report to the police for handling. If the police find out, wouldn't she be going to jail? Zhou Xinghua saw many people running towards the direction of the duty room and felt anxious. Shen Sangyu, I was wrong. You let me go. I can let you go, but you have to prove my innocence to everyone. Zhou Xinghua's face looked ugly, but now that she has reached this point, she can't even admit her mistake. Looking at the various gazes around him, Zhou Xinghua only felt the scorching heat on his face. After hesitating for a long time, he exclaimed loudly, "It was because I was jealous of you that I accidentally pushed you downstairs. I saw that you had shed a lot of blood, so I dare not admit it. Sangyu, it's all my fault. Please forgive me." There was a loud commotion in the crowd. Zhou Xinghua dared not look at it at all, so he had to lower his head and pretend to be dead. When Shen Sangyu saw the other party admit, the resentment in his heart suddenly dissipated. After a moment of confusion, I thought to myself, could it be the resentment left by the original owner during his lifetime? Shen Sangyu couldn't figure it out, but his gaze was straight at Zhou Xinghua and he said, "Zhou Xinghua, I won't forgive you. In the future, you shouldn't show up in front of me with this child, otherwise next time you'll be in prison." Zhou Xinghua's gaze was dull, clearly frightened. Shen Sangyu smiled slightly, his pale face carrying a hint of fox cunning. In this era, there is still no surveillance, and things have happened for a long time. Even if the police come, it is impossible to investigate thoroughly. So she's gambling. Gambling. Zhou Xinghua is not afraid of ghosts knocking on her door, and she is afraid of her secret being discovered by the police. Shen Sangyu smiled sweetly and pulled Wen Qingchuan's sleeve, saying, "Wen Qingchuan, let's go home." Wen Qingchuan said, "Don't panic." Shen Sangyu paused for a moment, his eyes puzzled. Wen Qingchuan gave Shen Sangyu a reassuring look and then said to Zhou Xinghua, "Sangyu's head injury is very serious, so you need to compensate for the previous medical expenses and future nursing expenses." After finishing speaking, Wen Qingchuan took out a few medical bills from his clothes and said, "The total cost now is 50 yuan, and I will have to review them in a few days. I will entrust you with the bills, as well as Sangyu's daily nutrition allowance of 2 yuan. After a pause, Wen Qingchuan silently calculated in his heart, "The total is 80 yuan. Could you please give the money to my wife now?" Zhou Xinghua's face was shocked. "Qingchuan, if not given, I will inform your workplace about this matter until it is given." Wen Qingchuan has no emotional attachment to Zhou Xinghua, and the reason he takes care of her in Tong Tong is only because he and Zhuang Yuliang are comrades in arms. But now it's his wife who is injured, so this is a different matter, he can distinguish. Wen Qingchuan's tone was too strong, and Zhou Xinghua's face went from shock to embarrassment. Zhou's father saw his daughter about to cry and spoke coldly, "Wen Qingchuan, do you really want to make things look so ugly?" Step-by-step pressure, how should her daughter handle herself next? Wen Qingchuan remained silent, and Zhou's father said, "Have you forgotten how Zhuang Yuliang died? Do you still want to force Xinghua and Tong Tong to die now?" Upon hearing this, Wen Qingchuan frowned. Just as he was about to say something, a petite figure suddenly stood in front of him. Looking down, it was Shen Sangyu. Shen Sangyu, now with his hands on his hips, scolded Zhou's father, "You old man are unreasonable. Who wants to force her to death? Did you see the gauze on my head? It was your daughter who wanted to kill me. How could it still be Wen Qingchuan's fault? Shouldn't we ask you for medical expenses?" After speaking, Shen Sangyu spread his hands and said, "Lose money, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here today. If anyone passes by here, I'll say your daughter is killing people. Offensive." Zhou's father was so angry that he wanted to drive someone away. He pointed at Shen Sangyu's head but couldn't say a word. Shen Sangyu saw this and sat down on the doorstep of the Zhou family, saying, "I'll tell those uncles that your Zhou family bullied me then." The original owner was originally a famous craftsman in the courtyard. Even though her father has passed away, there are still many uncles and uncles taking care of her. When Qingchuan looked at Shen Sangyu, who was pretending to be blind and seemed to be mischievous, with a hint of surprise in his expression. "I don't know if it's an illusion, but just now Shen Sangyu was intentionally speaking for himself. Zhou's father was so angry that he almost had a heart attack. In the end, he suddenly turned around and soon, 8 10-yuan bills appeared in front of Shen Sangyu. Take the money and leave. Shen Sangyu was not averse to money, so he immediately got up and said, "When Qingchuan, let's go." When Qingchuan glanced at Shen Sangyu holding his hand, with 10 slender fingers as smooth as sheep fat. Nodding slightly, "Let's go." Upon seeing this, Lin Hua was aware of the seriousness of the matter and waved his hand to the gossiping crowd, saying, "Let's all disperse." The crowd instantly dispersed like birds and beasts. After returning to the family courtyard, Shen Sangyu could feel that everyone was looking at her, but she didn't care. The corners of his mouth curled slightly, even humming a song that Wen Qingchuan had never heard before. It's still early now, and when Qingchuan saw Shen Sangyu in a good mood, he asked, "What would you like to eat for lunch today?" Shen Sangyu didn't hesitate to say, "Let's make sweet and sour pork ribs." When Qingchuan nodded and said, "I'll go buy it later." After speaking, when Qingchuan suddenly entered the study and when he came out again, he took out a white notebook from the room and said, "Here you are." Chapter 9. Encountering Enemies. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. Shen Sangyu glanced at the white notebook in Wen Qingchuan's hand. There are 6 big characters written on it. Current Savings Passbook. After a moment of confusion, Shen Sangyu opened his mouth wide and realized, "Is this a passbook?" When Qingchuan nodded and said, "My monthly salary is 70 yuan, and sometimes there is a subsidy for tasks. In addition to taking home 10 yuan and giving you 1,000 yuan dowry every month, there are still 3,000 yuan left in my passbook." Shen Sangyu couldn't understand what Wen Qingchuan meant and tentatively asked, "So? In the future, my salary will be deposited into this passbook. I will keep 10 yuan each month and you will handle the rest yourself. Now this passbook is yours." If it were before, he would definitely not have given the passbook to Shen Sangyu. At that time, he paid the dowry money himself, and due to his haste, he bought a bicycle and a dowry of 1,000 yuan, and then hastily got married. On the day of his wedding, he took on a mission. When he returned, Shen Sangyu had already used up the 1,000 yuan and even sold his bicycle. Saying not to be angry is fake, so he hid the passbook himself, and Shen Sangyu even had a good temper with him. But now he voluntarily gave it to Shen Sangyu. Shen Sangyu was pleasantly surprised and hesitated for a moment. She suddenly thought of the clothes in that cabinet, which were not only ugly but also frighteningly expensive. When Qingchuan has only been on a mission for 7 days, and there is hardly any remaining 1,000 yuan. When Qingchuan, "I'm sorry, I spent all that 1,000 yuan on buying clothes." After Shen Sangyu finished speaking, he harbored resentment in his heart and thought to himself that he should spend it all. He also bought a bunch of ugly clothes to keep up with others. But now she has nothing but the 100 yuan in her hand. After thinking for a moment, Shen Sangyu still took the passbook and said, "Then I'll keep it for now. Don't worry, I won't spend it recklessly, but our things are too few. I'll go to the supply and marketing cooperative to buy something tomorrow and come back, okay?" When Qingchuan was surprised that Shen Sangyu would voluntarily admit what the money had been spent on, let alone that Shen Sangyu would say this was their home together. "Just make your own decision." Shen Sangyu was deeply moved. Although she is not yet familiar with Wen Qingchuan, it must be said that Wen Qingchuan is really a good man. At noon, the two of them ate in the cafeteria. After finishing their meal, Wen Qingchuan ran to train. At 7 p.m., Wen Qingchuan brought dinner back from the cafeteria. "In the future, I will bring you food every day. If I have a task, you can go to the cafeteria or restaurant to eat by yourself." Wen Qingchuan has already eaten it, and now it's Shen Sangyu enjoying it there. Shen Sangyu nodded after listening. After all, she did not know how to cook. "Tomorrow, a military district car will take you out, and I will take you there. After when Qingchuan finished explaining, Shen Sangyu had almost finished eating. He stood up and put away his lunchbox, taking it to wash. The next day, the horn of the military district sounded again. Shen Sangyu covered his head with a blanket, and the sound of door opening and shallow footsteps echoed from the next door. It was unknown how long before when Qingchuan came to the door and said, "Get up and eat." Shen Sangyu slept soundly, but had to get up again. "I don't know if I slept too little in my previous life, so when I get here, I just go to bed and sleep." After washing up, Shen Sangyu held the steamed bun and weakly nibbled on it, staring blankly at something. She eats slowly, and when Qingchuan doesn't urge her. After he finished eating, when Qingchuan took the dishes and washed them again without saying a word. Shen Sangyu took a glance and realized that when Qingchuan seemed to have a bit of OCD. The room, which used to have few things but was messy, was now neatly arranged. When Qingchuan and Shen Sangyu went out together, and it was the bustling time in the courtyard. As soon as Shen Sangyu came out, everyone's gaze fell on her. "Captain 1, Sangyu." At this moment, the two of them were walking side by side when they suddenly heard someone calling themselves behind them. Looking back, it was Chao Ruyue wearing a grey coat. Upon seeing this, when Qingchuan stopped and asked, "Is sister.In.Law Chao okay?" "No, it's nothing," Chao Ruyue said, looking at Shen Sangyu. "Sangyu is going to the supply and marketing cooperative to buy something." Shen Sangyu nodded. "That's perfect. Let's come together then." Although the original owner had memories, they were not familiar with the direction of the supply and marketing cooperative, so they nodded. Thinking of the tiger that fell into the water, Shen Sangyu couldn't help but ask, "How is the situation with the tiger?" "Thanks to you," the doctor said, "the rescue was timely." "Thanks to you, Sister Sangyu, have you studied medicine before?" Chao Ruyue asked curiously. Shen Sangyu was taken aback. Even when Qingchuan looked over. She quickly explained, "No, we talked about this first aid method in class." Chao Ruyue didn't finish elementary school, and in addition, Shen Sangyu not only saved Huzi, but also had a misunderstanding about Zhou Xinghua before. Now she can be said to be very impressed and grateful to Shen Sangyu. Only a hint of doubt flashed in Wen Qingchuan's eyes, not knowing what he was thinking. In the winter morning of the 49th city, it was foggy. When Qingchuan walked all the way to the door, and by this time, the car was already filled with people, leaving only a few seats left. Chao Ruyue is tall and easy to climb up. Shen Sangyu looked at the height of the car and his own height, and found that his height was not average. The key is that when Chao Ruyue saw that she hadn't come up, she looked at her in confusion and said, "Sister Sangyu, why haven't you come up?" Shen Sangyu. She finally knew why the original owner was not familiar with the direction of going to the supply and marketing cooperative, and the relationship was that he couldn't even improve his height. As she was thinking about how to get up, she suddenly noticed that her feet were soaring up in the air. Before she could make a sound, she realized that she had already gotten into the car. Shen Sangyu widened his eyes and looked at Wen Qingchuan incredulously. When Qingchuan suddenly felt that his daughter.In.Law's gaze was somewhat cute, and he suppressed a smile and said, "I'll leave first. If I don't have time to come back at noon, I'll eat at the restaurant." After speaking, Wen Qingchuan stuffed a handful of money into his pocket. Shen Sangyu's face turned red, and when she realized it again, Wen Qingchuan had already left. "Sister Sangyu, the train is about to depart, come over quickly." Chao Ruyue quickly greeted Shen Sangyu. Shen Sangyu regained his senses and found a seat next to Chao Ruyue. She glanced at the stack of money in Shen Sangyu's hand, and there were at least 20.30 yuan in total. She was very surprised in her heart and said, "Captain Wen is also too willing to you. There are seats on both sides of the carriage, and at this moment they are densely packed with people." Chao Ruyue's voice was so loud that everyone's gaze turned to him. Shen Sangyu pursed her lips and remained silent, her gaze fixed on the direction in which when Qingchuan had left, unsure of what she was thinking. The big truck drove unsteadily for half an hour and finally came to a stop. The road was relatively smooth, but after getting off the car, she still vomited. Shen Sangyu's head was still wrapped in gauze, her small face was pale, and the blood on her lips had faded. She was already beautiful, but now she looks even more lovable. Chao Ruyue envied Shen Sangyu's young and good skin on the side. Seeing that Shen Sangyu had almost rested, she took her to the supply and marketing cooperative. Just as soon as she arrived at the supply and marketing cooperative, Shen Sangyu saw Zhou Xinghua shopping with her child at a glance. Chapter 10. Repairing Machines and Making Money. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. The two of them stared at each other in the air for 2 seconds, and then Shen Sangyu withdrew his gaze. Mom, it's a bad woman. Suddenly, the supply and marketing cooperative sounded a childish voice, and everyone looked at Zhou Xinghua. Zhou Xinghua wanted to cover his son's mouth, but Tong Tong broke free and continued, Mom, it was she who stole Dad. She's a bad woman. As Tong Tong pointed in the direction, everyone looked over and then showed disdainful looks. No matter when, the nickname, mistress, is always despised wherever it goes. Shen Sangyu's face darkened, but Chao Ruyue beside him couldn't help it anymore. Zhou Xinghua, did you teach your child to say that? Sister Sangyu reported to Captain Wen and obtained her marriage certificate. Don't talk nonsense. After speaking, Chao Ruyue pointed to Tong Tong again and said, and you, don't talk nonsense in the future. Tong Tong still wanted to speak, but Zhou Xinghua couldn't stop him. Mom, it's this bad woman. Papa, Zhou Xinghua didn't hesitate to slap Tong Tong in the face for fear of him saying anything more. The slap directly stunned the child, covering his face as he looked at Zhou Xinghua, and then burst into tears. Zhou Xinghua felt both heartbroken and angry, but still pretended to be weak and looked at Shen Sangyu, saying, Sangyu, the child is young and immature. In the past, I heard that the group leader often came to take care of us mother and son without getting married, which is why Tong Tong misunderstood. Don't argue with him. Shen Sangyu smiled angrily and said, when Qingchuan takes care of you because your husband sacrificed himself. He visits your house once a month out of camaraderie and basic moral sense, but there is no such thing as taking care of you. Please don't think too much about it, Miss Zhou. Tong 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 is almost 6 years old this year, isn't he? He should have his own thinking ability at this age. If you can't teach him well, just like you did just now, beat him a few more times so he won't speak recklessly. Seeing Zhou Xing trembling with anger, Shen Sangyu felt quite at ease and said, Am I right, Miss Zhou? As soon as this statement was made, the melon-eating masses in the supply and marketing society had already begun to discuss it. Shen Sangyu's mouth slightly raised, with a hint of mockery in his eyes and a faint expression. Zhou Xinghua lowered his gaze and showed a malicious expression, gritting his teeth and saying, Sangyu, you're right. Miss Zhou needs to educate the children well. After speaking, Shen Sangyu brushed past Zhou Xinghua directly. Chao Ruyue was stunned. I'll be good, the way cultured people speak is different. Zhou Xinghua turned around and looked at Shen Sangyu buying big and small bags of things. His expression darkened, and he forcefully dragged Tong Tong away. Chao Ruyue came to the supply and marketing cooperative and had nothing to buy except for some daily necessities, but when she saw Shen Sangyu reporting a series of things, she was completely dumbfounded. Especially for a piece of clothing that Shen Sangyu is interested in, it costs 20 yuan. Chao Ruyue had long known that Shen Sangyu liked to spend money, but she didn't expect her to love spending money so much. Sister Sangyu, it's not my sister.In.Law who said, you. Buying a piece of clothing for 20 yuan is not worth it. It's better to make it yourself. A set of clothes costs only 8 yuan at most. Shen Sangyu frowned, the style of the clothes was not particularly attractive. My sister.In.Law is right, but I don't have any clothes to wear in my wardrobe, and I don't know how to make clothes. Let's make do with it for now. Chao Ruyue. She didn't mean that. Wearing a 20 yuan piece of clothing is still called compromise. 3 months ago, Shen Sangyu just bought dozens of colorful clothes to go home, didn't she? Oh my god, I heard that the young daughter.In.Law of the captain's family is really a loser. Chao Ruyue heard that Shen Sangyu had asked for something again, and each price could match all the things she had bought today. Shen Sangyu didn't know how the people around her were feeling, but after watching them buy a lot of things, she was in a good mood. Although she doesn't know if the original owner will come back, she is very sorry for occupying the original owner's body, so no matter what, she will help the original owner seek revenge and live a good life. Shen Sangyu bought something for over 180 yuan in total. Last night, she found over 100 yuan in the wardrobe, so it's completely enough to make the payment. Could you please deliver the things to the military district compound? Shen Sangyu looked at the piled-up items and knew that he couldn't bring them back alone. How happy you are when you buy, and how much you want to cry when you go back. Comrade, it's possible, but the fare will be charged separately. Not much money, only 1 yuan. Shen Sangyu thought of the huge amount of money on his body and didn't care about this $1, so he took out another dollar. Chao Ruyue beside her was almost heartbroken. She wished she could grab Shen Sangyu's arm and say, "Give that 1 yuan to your sister.In.Law, and she will carry it back for you." A despicable wife. By the way, if it's not troublesome, please help me send this sister.In.Law's belongings back together. Chao Ruyue doesn't have many things, but it's too easy to handle alone. She didn't expect Shen Sangyu to think about herself for such a small matter, which has changed her outlook a lot. Coming out of the supply and marketing cooperative, it's almost 10 o'clock in the morning. The two of them went to the nearby market to buy 2 pounds of pork. Originally, they wanted to buy groceries, but Chao Ruyue felt that she was too destitute. The family courtyard has allocated a vegetable plot for each person, and daily life is basically fine. The problem is that when Qingchuan is too busy to farm, and Shen Sangyu doesn't even know where the land is. After hearing this, Chao Ruyue fell silent again and said, "Wait a few days. Auntie will teach you how to farm." Shen Sangyu agreed and said, "Okay, thank you, sister.In.Law." Chao Ruyue was very surprised to see Shen Sangyu so well behaved. In the past, Shen Sangyu either had an argument with this military sister.In.Law or with some military sister.In.Law. The family courtyard has not been quiet for the past 3 months. But now it's different. Shen Sangyu is too obedient now. By the time they finished buying everything, it was almost 11 o'clock and the military district's car was parked by the roadside waiting. Shen Sangyu thought of his purpose for coming out this time and said to Chao Ruyue, "Sister-in-law, I won't go back with you this morning." Chao Ruyue didn't think much, nodded, and thought of when Qingchuan entrusting herself to take care of Shen Sangyu. So she said, "The last bus is at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, don't miss the time." Shen Sangyu nodded. As I turned around and left, my stomach suddenly started growling. "I'm a bit hungry." Shen Sangyu glanced around and didn't see any restaurants around. Suddenly, her gaze turned to a restaurant not far ahead and she walked straight in. The name of the restaurant is very rustic, called the Peace Hotel, but the decoration is very luxurious, and next to the Peace Hotel is a small restaurant. Chao Ruyue originally thought Shen Sangyu would go to a small restaurant for dinner, but the next moment, Shen Sangyu walked into the Peace Hotel. The smile on her face instantly cracked open. Shen Sangyu, who walked into the restaurant, had no idea what Chao Ruyue was thinking. If she knew, Shen Sangyu would definitely be quite confused. Because she didn't even see a small restaurant next to the Peace Hotel. After sitting down, Shen Sangyu glanced at the menu and ordered 1 meat and 1 vegetable, spending 5 yuan. Even Shen Sangyu felt a bit sore, but when the vegetables were brought to eat, he suddenly felt that the money was really worth it. When she goes back later, she will pack another one and bring it back. Just as she was thinking about it, Shen Sangyu suddenly saw a middle-aged man wearing a gray cotton jacket hurriedly enter. As he walked, he shouted, "Old Qian, this is an emergency situation. Didn't your restaurant have an English-speaking waiter a few days ago? Lend it to me quickly." Qian Xinghua came out of the kitchen and couldn't help but ask, "Don't worry, speak slowly." The middle-aged man patted his thigh anxiously and said, "The machine I bought in the factory malfunctioned today. The person repairing the machine is a foreigner who only speaks English. His translator is on leave today. Recently, I heard that there is a waiter in your store who can speak English. I just wanted you to borrow it from me. Don't worry, the money will definitely not be less than his. Recently, his factory has a batch of urgent orders, and if they cannot be completed in the next few days, they may have to pay a large amount of money." Upon hearing this, Qian Shenghua also became anxious and honestly said, "Old Su, it's not that my brother didn't help you. The English server I told you about left last month, and I don't know what I'm doing now." Upon hearing this, Su Weigua's face turned pale. "It's over. Hello." Suddenly, Su Weigua heard a soft and pleasant voice coming from behind him. Su Weigua instinctively turned his head and saw a beautiful little girl smiling slightly at her. Shen Sangyu looked at Su Weigua with eyes as bright as stars and said, "Mr. Su, I can speak English. Do you need my help?"